Hey, LarkenRose here, and you all already know that Facebook and YouTube and a bunch of other places, used to be Twitter, maybe that's changing, have openly been stomping down on, for years now, on any opinions that don't match the agenda of the ruling class. And now it's just, you know, that crazy conspiracy theory is obvious, undisputed fact now by anybody paying attention, because it's come out in all the documents, and now there's like lawsuits. I think states are suing the feds and stuff for openly pushing on the different platforms, trying to pressure them into basically silencing dissent. So much for the First Amendment. So you all know that already anyway, so that's not going to be news to you. But I wanted to talk about a particular sort of example of that I see really obviously on YouTube, that is just so ridiculously hypocritical. It isn't just they're doing the bidding of the ruling class, because, okay, big whoop, like, of course they are. But the profound hypocrisy. Now, I've noticed recently that a bunch of my own comments under my own posts have magically been disappearing. And I notice a common theme. So I'm sure it's an algorithm and not actual people looking for them. And it's basically any discussion of the use of physical force. Now, those who see my videos know that I'm not at all subtle or secretive about the fact that I believe in the use of defensive force, even if the aggressor has a badge and a law supposedly justifying the violent aggression he commits. That doesn't make any difference morally. I've talked about that for years and years and years. So far, they haven't taken down my videos talking about that. Now, legally speaking, for those who give a crap about that, there's a big difference between talking about that in the abstract and telling people, hey, let's go, beat up that guy or go forcibly overthrow this or whatever. The latter of which I never do, because it doesn't do any good and because that's not the point here. I talk in abstracts about the philosophical principles and stuff. It's not about one particular example of injustice, since there's a gazillion particular examples of injustice. But I wanted to mention the profound hypocrisy, because if some normal person on his own said, I have a platform, but I don't want anybody ever, even in the abstract, advocating the use of physical force against other people, even defensively, the person would have the right to do that on his platform. Now, in this case, it sure as hell isn't the people who own YouTube acting on their own. It's government openly pressuring them to do that. Now, the big platforms also have an incentive to kiss the butt of the ruling class and all that. But that is not at all what YouTube does. YouTube is perfectly fine with people advocating immoral, violent aggression as long as it's legalized first. Because if you talk about, that person who had pot in the wrong state, yeah, the cops should go in there and kick his door down and drag him away and put him in prison because that's the law. The chance of YouTube ever taking down anybody advocating that is absolutely zero. They are 100% pro-violent aggression when it's being committed in the name of authority. There is nothing remotely close to a principle in their community guidelines, which are completely fictional. In case you haven't figured that out about YouTube and Facebook and others, there are no community guidelines. It's literally, if you say something the ruling class doesn't like, we pretend you violated non-existent community guidelines, and we either take it down completely or censor it or stomp it down in the algorithm with the algorithm so that hardly anybody's going to see it, and so on and so forth. But the level to which they are doing this to such an obvious degree, so that anybody talking about defensive force, even in the context of using it against private thugs, well, you're not allowed to even talk about that. Now, I don't know the exact, programming lines of the algorithms that are looking for that, but I know plenty of my own comments have disappeared when they weren't about any particular situation. They weren't telling anybody to do anything. They were just discussing the difference between immoral violent aggression and justified defensive force. And a lot of those comments have just disappeared. If you doubt it, try to post a comment like that under this video. And there's a pretty high likelihood, because I've had other people say, hey, my comments just disappeared too. Yeah, there's a pretty high likelihood if you do that, you'll see it magically vanish. But to me, it is like one... This might sound a little bit mean. One level of stupid is pacifism. I think pacifism is a very bad idea. Now, if you're being victimized by some immoral aggressor, with or without a badge, I think it's up to you whether to resist or not. I think you absolutely have the right to resist. But if you want to sit there letting yourself be an example of the bully, with or without a badge, beating you up in the hopes that other people will see it and go, oh, that's bad. Okay, you absolutely have that right. I would still kind of even complain about that logistically. But if you see somebody else being victimized and you have the ability to protect them and you don't, and you try to pretend that that's because you're principled and more noble, no, that's just cowardice. And it's funny because even Gandhi said, if you're being a pacifist because you're a coward, it would be better if you just use force, like righteous defensive force, because he didn't believe all defensive force is illegitimate just as much as aggressive. He just thought tactically it was going to work better. Now, you can debate about that, and I kind of disagree with him in a lot of ways about that. But, I mean, he kind of got results. A lot of innocent people got beat up in the meantime. But he did create a big enough pain in the butt for the British Empire that they kind of had to back out of India for the most part, at least with a lot of their thuggery. There's still economic controls and whatever. But the profound hypocrisy of platforms like YouTube, basically, as long as the immoral violent aggression is legal and you talk about it in euphemisms, then it's perfectly okay. It's enforcing the law of the land to violently assault people for victimless crimes. So that doesn't count as violence. They don't mind that at all. If their exact same policies and their exact same algorithms existed back in the days of slavery in this country, like overt chattel slavery, if somebody said, well, those laws have to be enforced, and like it's criminals that are breaking those laws and like trying to help slaves escape, and somebody else says slavery is really bad, we should help slaves escape, and they have the right to escape on their own if they can, and if we have to use force to help them escape, that's justified too. Literally, the algorithms right now that YouTube is using right now would take down that comment. If you're all in favor of enforcing the absolute evil that was slavery, they'd be perfectly fine with that, because that immoral violent aggression is legal. So we're going to pretend it doesn't count as violence. And this is the level of delusion that statism requires people to have. It's why you cannot be a statist and grasp reality. You have to be delusional. You have to be hypocritical. You have to be able to take euphemisms and BS propaganda and pile it on top of immoral violence until you get to the point where you're like, well, that's not immoral anymore. That's just law enforcement. That's the will of the people. That's our constitutional representatives carrying out the will of the people. And no, it isn't. It's immoral violence covered over by a bunch of bullshit euphemisms to make you dumb enough to think it's okay, and it's not. And if somebody suggests defending against immoral aggression, but their defending against it isn't legal, but the immoral aggression is, guess what algorithms are going to come stomp on you? And I have to wonder, like, there are other countries with more oppressive crap than here, and including China. Are we allowed to say bad things about China without YouTube taking it down? I guess we'll find out. The tyrannical, power-happy bastards running the ruling class in China, who aren't fond of criticism or dissent, they advocate some pretty harsh, heinous authoritarian crap. In a lot of ways worse than what happens here, by a lot. Now over there, if you go rah, rah, rah for the authoritarian crap committed by the ruling class of China, is YouTube going to say anything about it? I'm guessing no. But if you say, this is wrong, the people have the right to resist this, will those algorithms on YouTube take that down? No, I don't even know who, if anyone, can even get to YouTube in China anyway. And, you know, maybe it's different in Hong Kong and maybe in Taiwan. Oh, I forgot. We're supposed to pretend that Taiwan doesn't exist because the power-happy bastards in China want us to pretend that Taiwan isn't a thing. Taiwan is a thing. But to pretend that you can just have a policy that, like, well, unlawful violence, you can't be advocating that. Open a history book. Anybody with that mentality that it's okay to condone and vote for and petition for violent aggression as long as it's done in the name of law, but no, we can't, we're peaceful here. You can't ever suggest defensive force against legal aggression. Open a frickin' history book. Whose side do you think those algorithms, like YouTube's algorithms today, whose side would they have been on in Nazi Germany? I'll give you a hint. It's the Nazis. Fascist Italy under Mussolini? I'll give you a hint. They'd be on the side of Mussolini. Stalin and Lenin in the Soviet Union, I'll give you a hint. They would be on the side of Stalin and Lenin in the violent, heinous oppressions and injustices and mass murder of the Soviet Union. North Korea, well, I'm assuming you can't get YouTube in North Korea, but they'd be on the side of the evil oppressors. And you can go down the list. Their algorithms are written in such a way that anywhere they are, they're on the side of authoritarian violence and stomping on and censoring any mention, even in the abstract, which, by the way, is 100% legal in this country because it's the First Amendment. They're stomping on it anyway because they deem defensive force to be immoral and against community standards. Wow. And just, first of all, the fact that they pretend that community has decided this is just so Orwellian. It's straight out of North Korea to say that, oh, the community has decided that you disagreeing with the ruling class makes you bad. That's disinformation and misinformation, and that's dangerous because our all-powerful, all-loving lords and masters told you to believe something else. Here's the bright side. This has gotten so stupid and so ridiculous and so hypocritical and so pro-authoritarian and anti-freedom that even a bunch of people who weren't paying attention before are starting to go, what? Wait, you can't even say that on YouTube? Like, you're allowed to say, don't we have freedom of speech here? No. Because government is using these sort of pseudo-semi-private agencies and bullying them into censoring anything critical of government. And like I said, this isn't a conspiracy theory anymore. They totally got caught doing that. You can see the emails back and forth. You can trace it. They're having hearings about it in Congress. States are suing the feds for it. This is not debatable anymore. The federal government tried to silence dissenting opinions by way of algorithms in these, sometimes algorithms and sometimes just directly, they'll just say, we don't like this post. Okay. Stupid bureaucrats at Facebook or YouTube will run off and squash a post that the ruling class says they don't like. We don't like his opinion. Take him down. And I mean, they openly did that about Russell Brand, where some bureaucratic, dumbass, power-happy nightmare person in the UK was just openly messaging, you have to deplatform Russell Brand because years ago somebody alleged something. Is not proven in court, not even clear on the allegations, not even clear who were making the allegations. But we, the all-loving, benevolent rulers in the British ruling class, want you to silence him obviously because he's being critical of us, not because any of those allegations, whether they were true or not, Britain doesn't care about them. The ruling class of Britain. You know how I know? Prince Andrew. Did they seem to give a shit about those allegations? How long did they drag their feet on those? And there's some reporter, I forget if they were British or American reporter, and she was talking, she didn't know the cameras were rolling, I don't think. She's talking at length. We had this huge story about this slimy, evil crap, and they just said, no, we're just going to sit on it. We're not going to run that. So, no, the ruling class of Britain, the ruling class of the U.S., ruling classes all over the world, they don't give a crap if, like, children are victimized and there's assault going on and there's nasty things going on. They only care about their own power. I mean, at this point, anybody with a brain understands that. But the fact that YouTube and Facebook and places like that try to write algorithms and policies under the guise of community guidelines that are literally openly anti-freedom, pro-authoritarian across the board. It's not like, well, you can advocate certain levels of authoritarian injustice, which would be bad enough. No, there's no limits on that. Their algorithms won't stomp on. If you say, we have to enforce the law, if you advocate that the military go and bomb the hell out of some place and murder a bunch of innocent people there, YouTube will do absolutely nothing to take that down or put a warning on it. But if you make a comment that, like, maybe people have the right to defend themselves even against aggressors who have badges or wear military uniforms, well, now you're advocating violence. It's so Orwellian. It's so Ministry of Truth bullshit. When we violently attack other people, we, the ruling class and our hired thugs, it's law enforcement. It's national defense. It's lots of bullshit euphemisms, and we're okay with that. That's civilized. That's within our community guidelines. That is proper discussion. That's a proper opinion to have. But if you say, that's violence, that's immoral, and people have the right to defend themselves against that, you're the dangerous, scary, violent one. A lot of people, I've mentioned this before, a lot of people make the distinction between force and violence, which I probably should because it's clearer this way, where they only use the word violence to refer to a violation, from the same root word, of other people's rights. So defensive force, they call force. They don't call it violence. Sort of in the general sense, it's like often referred to as violence, but I should try to make it a point more often to just use the word violence to refer to immoral aggression and physical force. Defending, like justified moral defensive force, isn't violence, it's just force. Given that distinction, YouTube's policies and their algorithms are absolutely 100% pro-violence and anti-freedom. They're anti-defensive force, and they're completely pro-violence, as long as the violence is being done by parasitical authoritarian ruling classes. And again, the good news, if you can call it that, is this is getting so obvious that more and more people, like the viewership of mainstream media is plummeting. And when the censorship is this ridiculous, and like what happened up in Canada with that weaselly little slimeball dictator Trudeau, like their own courts just said, yeah, he totally wasn't allowed to do that. Like shutting down people's bank accounts, basically stealing their money because they supported people protesting, like their high court. Now, yeah, I know it's a game, and I know they do the thing of like, well, we'll abuse you and get lots of power and money out of it and bully you into enriching Big Pharma and going along with our agenda. Then a few years down the road, our courts will say, tisk, tisk, you weren't supposed to do that. Okay, now what? Is anything going to happen to the people who did that? Given that Trudeau personally pushed to ruin millions of people's lives? Is anything going to happen to him? No, because government violence is okay. But retaliation against complete authoritarian, including illegal authoritarian injustice, which it is the official position of the Canadian government that what Trudeau did was illegal authoritarian injustice. That is what the court ruled. Now, I don't give a crap about court rulings because half the time they're making excuses for why authoritarian violence is perfectly fine, when no, it isn't. But the fact that even then, like, and this is a fine example, the court ruled that there was no legal foundation for that. That their Charter of Rights in Canada, it's like their Bill of Rights, doesn't allow for what he did. That what he did was illegal. So, he can't hide behind the law. What he did wasn't within the law. Now imagine, rewind to the time of the truckers when he was painting them all as Nazis and they're violent, never mind that no violence was happening. And now his excuse is, well, it's a good thing we did that, otherwise it would have been violent. Who says? You're just making shit up. If they had gone there with the intention to be violent, you would know it, or you wouldn't know it, because you'd be frickin' dead. They went there with the intention of protesting and saying, we don't like this, which is what they did. And like a complete fascist psycho, you got an uppity tantrum and stole their bank accounts and prosecuted some of them and went full fascist. Like the Weasley slimeball you are, Mr. Trudeau. But if you back up, but with the foresight that, yeah, this is illegal, what he's doing, and you say, people have the right to disobey this and resist this because their own government, like their own courts, are later going to say that what they did is completely illegal and unjustified, not within the law. So do the people have the right to resist literally violent aggression by an authoritarian ruling class that ruling class ruled was illegal? Is that justified? Or are we even obligated to quietly submit to illegal authoritarian oppression? Well, guess what? The YouTube policies and the Facebook algorithms and things like that, guess what they're going to side with? They're going to side with even illegal authoritarian violence committed by thugs of the state. It's okay, not just to advocate that, but to do that, to actually inflict that on innocent people. It's okay to actually commit state violence. It's not okay, according to them, even in the abstract, to say in comments that people have the right to defend against that, even when that has been ruled illegal. Now, by the way, I'll throw this in too, which makes for this. I think there was a case in Indiana. No, I think it was the Indiana legislature. This was a few years ago. You can look it up and see if I got that right. The Indiana legislature basically tried to pass a law that said, if the cops illegally barge into your house, you're required to let them and tolerate literally an illegal armed invasion by brainless thugs of the state, and then later whine about it and try to sue them. That you're obligated to be illegally abused by government. Now, I think 2 seconds later, the Indiana Supreme Court said, no, you're not. Like, the law views a guy with a gun and a badge violently attacking you with no legal justification, same way as it views anybody else doing that. And by the way, what I want to end with, that reflects what is still U.S. Supreme Court case law from John Bad Elk versus U.S., or maybe it was U.S. versus John Bad Elk, where a cop completely illegally decided to arrest this guy. Didn't have a legal justification. Things went south, and the cop ended up getting shot by John Bad Elk. And it wandered up the courts, and it made it to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court basically said, a cop illegally detaining someone is basically viewed the same as somebody else just kidnapping somebody. If you don't have a legal basis for it, and so they said, you know, if there's a lawful arrest going on and somebody forcibly resists, that can be like, and ends up killing the cop, that can be homicide. And, you know, again, of course, legality makes no difference to morality. But setting that aside, even the Supreme Court said that forcibly resisting illegal actions by the cops, even if it means you end up killing the illegal aggressor wearing a badge, is often, it's either a lesser crime or no crime at all, depending on the context, which is what the U.S. Supreme Court said. So now you get this weird thing that the First Amendment says that we're allowed to advocate in the abstract for anything. And even says there was a Minnesota versus somebody Supreme Court case where some government bureaucrat was whining, they're saying things about me. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, they're supposed to be able to criticize you, in particular because you're a public official. And one of the main reasons for the First Amendment is that if public officials are deserving of the contempt and hatred of the people, it's like the words the Supreme Court was using, the First Amendment is there so people can say hateful things about politicians who deserve it, and we don't get to distinguish whether they deserve it or not. That's what the First Amendment is for. You get to say that stuff. So the First Amendment in the specific case of John Bad Elk versus the U.S., or the other way around, it is the law in this country that forcibly resisting unjust, illegal aggression by thugs with badges, when they don't have the legal right to do what they're doing, can be totally justified, even sometimes if it results in the aggressor with a badge dying in the process. That is the law of the land, for those of you who believe in that. The law of YouTube and Facebook is that you can't even talk in the abstract about it. Think how weird that is. According to the legal system, you're absolutely allowed to talk about using defensive force. You're allowed to, in the abstract, advocate violent revolution, which I don't, by the way, because as long as people believe in government, they'll just put up another one. Revolution wouldn't actually accomplish anything. And if people don't believe in government, you don't even need a revolution. You just ignore them out of existence. But you're allowed to advocate revolution. It would be a little bit weird if you weren't allowed to do that, since that's like the origin of the country. Rah, rah, rah on July 4th. Just don't say what it was about. It was about literally the Declaration of Independence saying the moment government is destructive of individual liberty, it is the right and duty of the people to alter or abolish that government. So it's so bizarre that these platforms have been bullied into enforcing a level of censorship that is like a threshold way below what the Supreme Court says we're allowed to say. So it's so weird to watch government, by way of these platforms, be more fascist than they can even be in their own courts and with their own laws. And to watch these platforms go that fascist, like, it's kind of infuriating and ridiculous. But, like I said, on the bright side, it's making a lot of normal people say, wait, we're not even allowed to talk about that? In the abstract, not even advocating anything, but just discussing philosophical concepts that were literally discussed by every single one of the founding fathers? We're not allowed to talk about the ideas on which the country was started? No, a lot of those ideas were statist, and I disagree with them anyway. But when it gets that ridiculous, that's when even normal people start to go, wait, what the hell is going on? So, on the one hand, it's obnoxious having to deal with that and having a bunch of my own comments that weren't even anywhere near, like, inflammatory. They were just discussing philosophical principles. To watch them disappear under my own videos, that's kind of ridiculous. But to watch that level of stupidity waking up a bunch of people who otherwise wouldn't have woken up, okay, I guess that's a good enough trade-off, that they're getting that ridiculous. And up in Canada, Trudeau got that fascist and ridiculous that a bunch of people who had just gone along with it were like, what is happening? And then Biden and Trump got that ridiculous with their power grabs, which later the court said, yeah, you had no right to do that, like the mask mandates. Federal court said, yeah, that wasn't at all legal at all at any point in time. You never had the authority to do that, but you did it anyway. So it's, again, backing up and looking at the overall game, when they get this ridiculous, it's actually a good thing in the long run. In the short run, it's obnoxious and stupid, and lots of people should point it out and complain about it, like I'm doing right now. But in the long run, they're literally making enemies out of a bunch of people who last week were just sort of oblivious, law-abiding taxpayers who, oh, just play by the rules and blah, 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 until they found out, oh, there aren't rules. The psychos in power just make up whatever they want, and they're getting more and more ridiculous about it. So, yeehaw, try to post some comments on this video and watch YouTube's algorithms stomp on them. It would be pretty funny if they, like, turned them off for this video because they didn't want to make a point. But literally use some words to say things like, you know, people have the right to resist. You can even just limit it to illegal aggression committed by those in law enforcement. People have the right to use force to stop that. That's what the Supreme Court says. It's what all the courts have to say now. And yet, YouTube will stomp on you and delete your comment and pretend it was never there if you say that. So it'll be interesting to see if this video stays up, because I've discussed this in a bunch of videos and they haven't taken down the videos yet. That might be like, that step might be a little bit too awkward for them, but I mean, we're about to find out. We'll see if they take this video down. But yeah, feel free to comment below and test out what I'm saying and see if their algorithms don't delete anything that talks in terms about defensive force against aggressors. Because that's been happening a lot lately. And the more people who notice it, the better. Yeehaw.